Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, July 2nd, 2018. Happy July to you. Yesterday was July Day. We don't really often celebrate that, but I figure the other 11 months are getting jealous, and it's time to have days named after them, too. I don't really know why we have a May Day versus all the other days. We know what we do on May Day, sort of. I don't know if we all know, but it doesn't matter. It's not May, it's July, and we don't really do a July Day. It was Canada Day for July Day, so that's a rare coincidence. Probably not at all, is it? So happy Canada Day if you celebrated it. Happy Tariff Day if you were hit by tariffs trying to celebrate Canada Day. All of those things could have happened over the weekend. Hell, anything could have happened over the weekend. The North Koreans could have restarted their nuclear program or given plenty of evidence that they never stopped it and in fact ramped it up. Not that the president would have noticed in between cheeseburgers and rounds of golf and couch surfing. And couch surfing is probably too active a term for what he does. He has, of course, no idea what was going on. But he was tweeting over the weekend. I've sort of weaned myself off of the Donald Trump tweets. I never did follow Donald Trump. So this is really the good news. It's not me doing anything. What is good news about this is I never followed Donald Trump, but I always got a pretty steady diet of his, at least his most egregious tweets, because the people in my timeline would become outraged by them and retweet them, or sometimes they moved on to tweeting screen captures of his more offensive tweets so as not to give him the clicks or retweets or whatever. And I don't even know whether they count retweets with comments as retweets or not. But anyway, it seemed like a pain in the ass, really, but a pretty good Twitter social media strategy. The point I was trying to make, though, is fewer and fewer people who I used to rely on, it wasn't a conscious decision, but used to be the ones that would feed me Trump's comments, are doing that. Fewer of them every day, and I think that's interesting. I'm wondering if it's any sort of indication whether collectively we are all paying just a little bit less attention to what the president is squawking about at any particular given moment. That would probably be a good thing. And, that's, I don't know. I'm going to keep my eye on that trend. We'll see if we can't figure something out. It is Monday, and we have a full week ahead of us. It's just that I won't give you a full week of shows to go along with it. Why not? Vacation time. Time for me to take the big trip. It's my 50th birthday this year. Don't get too excited. It's not today. It happens over the summer, and it doesn't happen during my trip. So, and probably all of you will figure it out because Facebook, and as it turns out, every year, my birthday is marked by an influx of emails in my inbox, not emails that say, hi, happy birthday, but emails that say that somebody else got a notification on their social media platform that it was my birthday, and they clicked the button to say happy birthday, and okay, so you know how it is. We are all greeting one another in passing, and why not? Seems appropriate. We actually, most of us never met in real life anyway, so I think that sort of greeting is somehow proportional and appropriate. That's my day on Facebook each year, is deciding at what time of day it makes the most sense to go on my own Facebook page once a year and say, thanks everybody. And then we all have celebration. Anyway, it's my 50th birthday this year. It was my wife's 50th birthday earlier this year. And somewhere along the line, she got the idea that since we were both having this big birthday, we ought to have some sort of commensurately large-scale present, which we gave to the kids, essentially. And we're all going on our big trip. We're going to Iceland because Greg went there and had a great time. I went there also, briefly, for like a 3 or 4 day jaunt about 4 years ago, almost exactly 4 years ago, to the day, now that I think about it. We were there in July of 2014. And this time we bring the kids. It'll be a very different kind of a trip. We were, of course, on my youngest brother Lou's bachelor party, which is a hell of a bachelor party, going to Iceland, really. But that was like every bit, just like going here for a birthday present. That was something extravagant. He was the youngest of us, last, I guess, to get married. And I don't know, we all felt like, hooray, let's do that. And, many of us had been, of course, out and on our own for a while, and so we each had small amounts of money saved, which we decided to throw out the window as we flew to Iceland. But it was a tremendous experience, and everybody was jealous of my having gone, so I was the king of the house. Not really. It didn't really do me any good. They were all jealous, though, and they wanted to see this fantastic scenery, so we're going much more of a nature trip this time. And, well, what the hell? That's it. So we're leaving on Wednesday, which I did have a friend point out, nice of you to leave the country on July 4th. But we picked July 4th because flights to Iceland from the East Coast here in the United States, not Canada. It is Canada Day the other day, but this is the United States. We'll be flying up the East Coast in the late evening, presumably when the fireworks begin in much of the East Coast area, if there are Wednesday night fireworks and they're not doing them on Saturday or whatever. And we're hoping to be able to see them from out of the plane. We booked the correct, that is to say, left side of the plane. We'll be flying up the East Coast, so we should be able to see the fireworks on our way up, and should be kind of exciting, sort of a special 4th of July. We decided to fly back on everybody's favorite flight day, of course, Friday the 13th. Hooray. So, that'll be really exciting. We're not that superstitious, and as long as we don't fly the plane under a ladder, I think it will be okay. Or, hi, this is your pilot. I'm a black cat. That sort of thing might be bad. I don't know. We'll see. See how it works out. At any rate, big fun planned for us, but what does it mean for you? I don't know. I'm working on it. We got live shows today. We got a live show tomorrow. Wednesday, of course, is a holiday. And we're not leaving until the evening, and I was thinking up until recently, we'll do a show on Wednesday. But it is a holiday. That's a good excuse for everybody to knock off. Maybe you're home, off from work. Don't know if you want to wake up in the morning and hear the podcast. Those of you who listen later, of course, it won't make much difference to you. But maybe you'll be on your way to the fireworks. We'll see how Joan feels about it. Maybe Greg would like to sleep in that day, too. Or Greg may say, you can't leave without giving me one more chance to tell you the stories I've been reading. And I would be perfectly willing to do that. Where is my... you know what I see happening here? I don't know if my Skype opened on my desktop. We're going to have to fix that. Hold on, Greg. You probably... yeah, I see what's happening here. Not really. But we'll say that I do. Can I just kick this back on? Will that open? How come that... You know what? I updated my... let's see. Maybe I can just open it on the desktop here. I updated things on... there we are. Okay, well, I hear a noise anyway. That's the noise of him saying, no one is picking up. And okay, let's say try again, Greg. And, well, why don't I type that? This is a big... boy, everything's super slow and sleepy today. Just like your host. Okay. Oh, by the way, while I'm waiting, here we are. Okay, at least that worked. We have that going for us. Good morning, Greg. Hi, how you doing?
Hey, good morning. I like the music, but, it keeps playing without anybody picking up. It's not quite the same.
Well, just imagine me singing, is it Girl from Ipanema? I would like it to be the case. It's a good hold song, I think.
Yeah, I the way Sinatra did it.
Okay. We had that would be acceptable to me. We had an update in the software today. So guess what the software update is? No work.
I don't know. What?
Yeah, I updated one of the audio programs that runs the show, basically figuring why wouldn't I click update 10 minutes before the show? What could go wrong? And
absolutely,
the answer is that. And for some reason, I don't know. It's supposed to. The update was supposed to actually open up all your applications more smoothly, and so. The answer,
all I can say to that is I want to know if you support the United States Fair and Reciprocal Tariff Act.
It sounds like, well, that's the sort of bill
which
from which
is
I
also
think
known
we
as the FART Act.
Right. Tariff relief is the way they talk about when you lower tariffs, and I think that probably makes a lot of sense. That's one of the better acronyms I've heard.
Right.
I'm for it.
Trump is tooting his own horn about getting out of the World Trade Organization. That's really what this is all about.
Right. I need to make up an acronym that spells beans somehow out of this. We'll work on it.
Well, I think, the main thing to do is, after reading about that, is just go back and watch Blazing Saddles.
Okay.
Because you need some relief anyway, and it's a great movie.
Fair and reciprocal tariffs are good for the heartland.
Yeah, I suppose.
So good.
But
this is a whole show.
I don't know. It was a bad week last week. I think it's going to be a better week this week, only because, couldn't be any worse. But let me give you some data to go with that opinion.
All right.
First of all, this is Ron Brownstein. The GOP counts on rural and small town seats as its firewall in the House, but in the Trump trade war, which is aided and abetted by the FART Act, the total value of this year's U.S. corn, soybean, and wheat crops has dropped about $13 billion, or 10%, since the start of June.
Gluten intolerance is causing these tariffs.
With more tariffs to come. And so let me just point out some data we have, which I think is awfully interesting. And this comes from Civics. I follow Civics fairly closely. I follow all the polls, but this one's daily. It's a daily tracker and has all sorts of interesting data buried in there. This one is Donald Trump's job approval. Do you approve or disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling his job as president?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Right? And so currently, we'll give you that link at the bottom so it's just easier for you to follow along as we do this on the radio.
Here's the link.
And right now, Trump is 54% disapprove and 43% approve. But that's not the interesting story.
Why won't you tell me the interesting one?
The interesting part is if you go down to Party, which is on the left where you can click on it.
Party.
And you look at Democrats. Okay.
All right.
94% disapprove, 5% approve, 2%.
I had to move my screen to see both lines.
If you look at Republicans, it's, of course, the opposite. 91% approve, 6% disapprove. And neither of those is changing. But look at the independents.
All right. Okay.
And you see some movement from June. On June 1st, the independents were 52-42 disapproval. Now it's 55-39, which is, a trend that is worth watching. Basically, Trump is losing the independents with the baby jails and the tariffs is what I'm telling you.
Yeah, it's an interesting pattern that's going on. They are both pretty steady, but there are little pulses of opposite direction movement that are interesting to watch, and they're pretty regular almost.
Right. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that Civics actually will stick in a note.
Oh.
Like, this was the wiretap tweets. This was the Affordable Care Act defeat. This was Syria airstrikes. This was James Comey being fired. This one was the Pompeo-Kim meeting where the independents really liked that, and they got a much smaller approve, disapprove. It was actually down to only 5% disapprove right after the Pompeo-Kim meeting until people realized that, it's all BS and smoke and mirrors, and actually North Korea isn't doing anything to denuclearize. And so now it's back up to 16. So, that's a big change. And also, if you're looking at the House of Representatives, if the House of Representatives vote were held today, who would you vote for? The generic ballot on Civics is 7 points, and it's been, again, let's go back to June 1st. That's a good place to look. It was 48-41 on June 1st. It's now 49-42, but it's the first time in the entire polling that they've done, going back a year, that the Democrats have hit 49. But I think even more interesting than that is one piece of locked data that I'll give you that isn't available to the public, and that is on enthusiasm.
Oh my gosh! Wait, are we gonna still stick with the trombone or the?
Well, this gives you a chance to do both.
Oh, Oh, I should have waited.
right? Because if you're looking at Democratic enthusiasm, get ready for the the quote.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So Democratic enthusiasm
Enthusiasms.
is 77%.
Is that?
No, not yet. Republican enthusiasm is
okay.
only
Yes.
66%.
Aha. So
There you go. That's the way you do it. So there's a big gap there. And, one of the things that you'll see quoted by the pundits,
Yes.
because the pundits are kind of weird,
We love those
is this whole idea of, well, I don't know if the Democrats can sustain their anger, and I don't know, and, this whole thing about immigration, it's going to mobilize the Republican base. Not seeing it.
Okay. Well,
Not
good.
seeing it, right?
I
It
am
really
glad.
hasn't changed much of anything. So let me give you a couple of pieces on that, which I think are interesting. Of course, you have to sit through the Dems in disarray, Dems stink kind of beat that people have. At the
Okay.
Washington Post, that's given to Michael Shearer. I now know that if I see a Michael Shearer story, it's going to be bad. Sometimes it even has bad in the headline. This one is a bad week for Democrats, which it was last week. Give rise to a big problem. Outrage could become an obstacle in the midterms.
Well.
You know why?
No.
They're abolishing ICE.
Oh yes, of course. Sure.
Oh my gosh,
this
everything's
story.
going to fall apart and everybody's going to rush and run to vote for the other side because I don't know why.
Warm drinks.
Something.
Yeah, that's been the story, and it's been pretty amazing. And I think the answers have been, I think the right one. Largely, most people are saying no. That's actually a stupid agency, and these things you keep printing these stories that say Democrats or independents or moderates are going to run away from this abolish ICE thing, and most people are like, tell me about what you mean.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me more.
Let's look a little further. Some data on that in a minute, but I also, want to point out that the New York Times will never be outdone by the Washington Post when it comes to Democrat stink. So this one is a Trump story. It's in the opinion section by Matthew Schmitz, who's the senior editor at First Things, whatever that is.
We don't know.
And here's his opinion: Trump's
like a
purple
newsletter.
family values.
Yeah.
Okay, in the months leading up to Donald Trump's election, I noticed a divide in how my acquaintances spoke about family values or lack thereof. People I knew from college or had met in New York
Elitist.
expressed distaste for Mr. Trump's behavior. That's because everybody in New York knew him.
Yes.
He's a freaking liar. If they were religiously conservative, they stressed his infidelity while also objecting to his insults of women. If they were liberal, they objected to his treatment of women and viewed his infidelity as a sign his religious supporters were hypocrites. Well, that's true. Not a single peer of mine in New York, no matter how conservative or religious, publicly supported Mr. Trump. In contrast, almost all the people I know in my hometown in Nebraska proudly supported him.
Here's the answer.
Nebraska.
Not a New Yorker. Okay.
They glossed over his infidelities and stressed he seemed to be a good father. A good father. This is a guy who farmed out his kids because he didn't want them. They were impressed by his respectful sons and admired the success of his daughters. The people I knew in Nebraska have the
What?
same moral values as my religious acquaintances in New York, but a totally different view of Mr. Trump as a standard bearer. What made the difference? In a word, class. So he basically goes on to try to make the case that working class people are dysfunctional and therefore relate to him, and they're all Roseanne. And so the elites just don't get this.
Right. Well, I remember the episode in Roseanne where Dan flies to a charity golf tournament in Lake Tahoe and tries to have a threesome with 3 porn stars. And rather than let Roseanne find out about it, arranges to pay them $500,000 between the 3 of them. But he keeps the relationship going by jetting out to the Beverly Hills Hotel and meeting them in bungalows.
Right. And, of course, that's the cool part, because family values means spending dollars to pay off your mistresses, because all the working class families do that. And it also
cash
means,
fund
disliking
for
your
almost
kids and farming them off to everybody else.
Right.
And, of course, only the poor can be dysfunctional, because elites, never have any of these issues.
No, we should be subsidizing this for the middle class, by the way.
Oh, by the way, also family values means baby jails because what you're supposed to do is snatch kids and then put them in cages because that's what the working class do all the time.
Yes,
Did you know that?
Darlene was in jail for most of the show, as I recall.
So Atrios points out, of course I have to change this for radio, what coastal elites don't understand is that chicken fricking is what normal everyday Americans do. Every day they frick the chickens. They can't stop fricking chickens. New York Times tomorrow.
Yeah, okay, why not? It might
Right?
as well.
And I point out, they also pay six-figure big bucks to hide the chicken fricking from the other chickens.
Bucks,
Elites
that's
just
funny.
don't get
Buck,
that.
buck? Yeah. Well, it's true. We overlook that, and we think everybody does it, and we just don't understand it. Not a lot of people have that kind of chicken frickin' money.
What is so that's how it goes. Now, here's a fascinating piece, much, much better in the New York Times.
Yeah.
Okay? And this one is, what if Trump's nativism actually hurts him politically?
What if?
Oh, my God. It'll make all the hot takes get rewritten. That's what it means.
What? Where is this coming from?
Howard Levine and Wendy Ron, political scientists at the University of Minnesota.
Okay.
Right? So not Nebraska, Minnesota. It's still, the middle of the country.
Minnesota, nice.
Right? This is not a New York, centric kind of thing.
Right, sure.
So they write, President Trump's short-lived family separation policy extended the herd line,
yeah,
on immigration he promoted during his presidential campaign. Many analysts believe this strategy helped him win the election by politicizing latent nativist sentiment among white Americans. At his rallies, Mr. Trump consistently propounded a view of immigrants as criminals and miscreants, not to mention a cause of unemployment and wage stagnation among native-born citizens. As president, he's continued to use dehumanizing language in reference to immigrants like vermin, infest, and animals. By the way, he has done those things. Those are family values, right? Because that's the way working class people always talk about each other.
Vermin. Yeah.
There is a consensus among scholars and commentators that an individual's view on immigration had a bigger impact on how he or she voted in 2016 compared to recent elections.
Racism. Go ahead.
Given that white Americans tend to be substantially more anti-immigration than pro-immigration, one might expect that highlighting a hardline stand on the issue would have benefited Mr. Trump in the election.
Yes? One would have.
One would have. But contrary to received wisdom, the immigration issue did not play to Mr. Trump's advantage nearly as much as commonly believed. According to our analysis of national survey data from the American National Election Studies, a large representative sample of the population of the United States, and much better than exit polls, folks. Hillary Clinton did better in the election than she would have if immigration had not been so prominent an issue. In fact, a liberal backlash seems to have contributed to Mrs. Clinton's victory in the popular vote count.
Oh. Okay.
Most white Americans, they point out, want immigration levels to drop or remain the same, although the sentiments have softened somewhat. But percentage of all white voters by views of immigration who supported Democrats, Hillary Clinton captured far more pro-immigrant voters than her predecessors. 51% of pro-immigration voters, of white voters, voted for the Democrat in previous years, Kerry, Obama, but Clinton got 72% of them.
Okay. Well.
So what they're figuring out is that Mr. Trump did only slightly better than his Republican predecessors among anti-immigrant whites, but among pro-immigration whites, Clinton far outpaced Kerry and Obama.
Okay.
Among anti-immigrant whites, Mr. Trump improved only marginally compared to Mitt Romney.
I'm feeling better.
He went from 71 to 79, and Mrs. Clinton went to 72 from 50. So she had a big jump. And they point out they can't know whether this asymmetry across elections is a function of Mr. Trump's nativism, Mrs. Clinton's inclusive pronouncements. Remember, it's the Times. Everybody's Mr. and Mrs. here.
Oh, yes, right.
What we can say is that after Mr. Trump and Mrs. Clinton repeatedly clashed over the issue, Mr. Trump's electoral gain paled against Mrs. Clinton's gains over Mr. Kerry and Mr. Obama. What about turnout? There's no evidence that pro-immigration whites were less or more likely than anti-immigration whites to cast ballots in 2016. So, by instigating a liberal counter-reaction, it seems possible that highlighting immigration may no longer be an effective political strategy for the Republican Party, and this may be the case for two reasons. First, xenophobic whites already vote Republican.
True. I think you've said that.
Whereas less intolerant whites tend to waver, but Democrats are getting the benefit of the less intolerant, or the tolerant, as we like to say, whites. Tolerant whites are more likely to vote the Democrat now.
You can only measure whiteness in terms of its relative intolerance.
Right, exactly. Second, 2016 marked a key change in rhetorical strategy among Republican presidential candidates. From 68, when Nixon first exploited his Southern strategy to attract resentful whites through law and order and states' rights, to 2012, when Mr. Romney read ads claiming that Mr. Obama wanted to allow welfare recipients to let paychecks without having to look for work. These were what we used to call dog whistles with plausible deniability. But in 2016, Mr. Trump got rid of the dog whistles and basically picked up a bullhorn instead, to summarize the article.
I am a racist.
For those reasons, we think Mr. Trump's explicit appeals to intolerance are likely to help Democrats more than Republicans. If we're right, there'll be less incentive for future Republicans to contest elections by instigating group division. Perhaps then partisan competition may return to one of its core questions: how much the government should intervene in the economy, what the proper size of the safety net is.
I doubt it.
As polls consistently show, voters care more about those economic questions than they do about cultural politics. But if you gin up cultural politics, then some people will vote on it depending upon what the issue is and where you live.
Yes.
I added that last part, but that's true. So the bottom line is that ginning up this whole thing, abolish ICE, that's going to destroy it. Well, maybe not.
Well,
maybe actually it's a net plus for the Democrats, not a net minus.
That is pretty amazing, considering, the amount of time and ink and virtual ink spent over the last couple of days insisting that everything the Democrats are for, well, while they were positive policy pronouncements, we're just going to gin up opposition on the other side and motivate the other base. And
the other base, also known as the family of values.
Yes, right. And, of course, that was always false, but never wondering whether it might happen in reverse. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. We just had a small version of the show during the break. Trying to discuss what's happening next week. You know what? One of the things I might have to do in order to save time to prepare some of these things is you lucky people might be forced to listen commercial free, even though we don't have commercials, but even break free next week, as it might end up being too much trouble to engineer the breaks back into these things I've recorded. So the ancillary benefit, I'll be gone, but you won't have to fast forward through breaks if you listen to the podcast. On the other hand, don't drink anything if you listen live. That's, I'll just say, avoid the liquids unless, either you're comfortable with that or you're listening in the bathroom. However you take care of that. Not my business.
Right.
It is
well,
quite literally
David invited
your
me to
business.
call in, but he said nobody's going to pick up for 2 weeks. So.
That's right. What you all could do, though, is everybody who listens could get on Skype, and you could just listen to Greg for half an hour, 45 minutes, and, I don't know if he'd stay
one at a
home
time. I don't know how to do these group things, so it would have to be one at a time. So, right. I'll just repeat the half hour like all day.
Yeah, like Weather Band Radio. It'll be nice.
So Iceland, where are you going to go in Iceland? What are you going to do?
Iceland is Iceland. There's not that many places to go.
You're going to drive around the rim because, that's what you do.
Basically all there is.
It's all mountains and volcano and glaciers and waterfalls.
Yeah. So, we're going to see a lot of those things. We'll be, based in Reykjavik because that's where you base things when you go there. And but we'll be there for a long time. Last time I went for 3 or 4 days, and that's plenty to go and see Reykjavik and the local environs. But there were so many things that we wanted to do that rather than do a 3 or 4 day trip and pick one or two, we decided to do several 3-day trips and do them all, because we're not likely to go back again, I must say. And what my big regret is that we won't be making a flight over to Greenland at any point. It's just we can't justify that cost, since it's walking around a fishing town in Greenland is fun, but not $1,000 fun. But sounded like a great opportunity to get there. But yeah, we'll be going down into ice caves and volcanoes and whatnot, all the waterfalls, of course, and hot springs and
any pony riding.
Yeah, we'll ride everything they have. Some ponies.
What they have is Icelandic ponies,
whales,
which are really horses.
Probably. Yes, and
sturdy fellows, even though they're kind of short.
Yeah, well, we'll see, and if the elves will allow us to ride them, we will try that too.
Yeah, the elves, the gnomes, the trolls, they're all there.
Yeah, well, that's. We should bring some trolls back for the next election.
Oh, that'd be a good idea.
I will try. I don't know what. Customs. I have no idea. Well, this is why we need to abolish ICE. They won't catch me with the trolls. Abolish ICE next week, everyone.
That's abolish ICE, not abolish Iceland. Okay, they're completely separate things. Please do not confuse them.
Right. We'll take Iceland and leave them alone. Honestly,
you'll have a great time. Of course, it's a wonderful country, and I hope you enjoy.
Yeah.
So let me finish up with this piece here. This is kind of interesting with a different twist. Remember, it may be. Maybe. That against conventional wisdom, immigration actually breaks the Democrats' way, because people really don't like taking kids and throwing them in baby cages, and there are pictures. But here's another, and again, it really was a bad week for Democrats last week because of the Supreme Court. This one is by Sahil Kapoor in Bloomberg. Republicans near their goal of overturning Roe, but reaching it could backfire. It's basically what happens when the dog catches the car. His subheading says it all. Majority that wants legal abortion could vote for Democrats, and a surge of female voters may endanger GOP majority in Congress.
Sounds like the Minnesota article we just read.
Yeah, that female voter surge is already happening. We have candidates running. We have females managing those campaigns, perhaps a little bit under the surface and a bit invisible, but there they are. And, of course, voting. And voting heavily for Democrats and breaking heavily for Democrats. And we already talked about the fact that there's no sign that the enthusiasm is waning, despite the articles in the New York Times and the Washington Post.
Right. Okay.
And now you have this. And so when you see a dumb article saying, I don't know for 4 months whether or not the Democrats can sustain their enthusiasm and their wanting to vote. You've got Roe v. Wade on the table. What are you talking about?
Yeah. And that may be part of the plan on the other side, is they might think, if we just move quickly, install justice, kill it off. I don't know whether they think people will
nobody
give
will
up.
care. What are they talking about?
But we don't need to do anything about that. Yeah,
that's crazy
I don't know.
Talk.
It is. It obviously would enrage people, but it's not a great plan or anything like, we'll just we'll show them. I'd rather preserve it, but and maybe
now they're the dog that caught the car, said Joshua Wilson, a political scientist at the University of Denver. Oh, another guy from the middle of the country here. Everybody isn't from New York. And author of the 2016 book, The New States of Abortion Politics. Here's the opportunity to do the thing that anti-abortion advocates have wanted to do for decades.
Yes.
And it's really risky because their base really wants this, but the majority of Americans don't. So this could really mobilize Democratic voters. And this is what happens when you just concentrate on the Trump base. You miss the bigger picture.
Yeah. More diner interviews, I guess.
I suppose. But try asking the women at the diners.
Oh,
ask
yeah.
the waitress,
That's true.
Just ask the guy sitting at the table.
Yeah, that's true. I don't see. You know what? I'm trying to think. Maybe I'm just not reading it closely enough. Do they talk to the wait staff?
Well, if you go to McDonald's, there's no waitress, so there's
right.
But when they go to the diners, they have every opportunity to do that.
You'd think, and then I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that some of them have done that, but the bosses probably yell at them. Don't give an interview later after your shift, and maybe it doesn't work. I wonder whether husbands just say, "I'll speak for the family, thank you very much." They do interview women. I have seen that.
Right.
not
So let's go back to the pundit roundup here and just pick up anything else that perhaps we want to talk a little bit. Some stuff that's in the news that I didn't cover in the pundit roundup, of course, is Michael Cohen's daily story about, gee, I think I'm going to flip.
Yeah, I had a great graphic for that and I lost it. But all right, yeah, I hope he does. I think.
Right. We have from the Washington Post, not what we expected. Trump's tax bill is losing popularity. There's been no acceleration in wage growth. While the White House frequently touts announcements that some companies give bonuses or pay increases, they're not widespread. The missing piece of the puzzle is wage growth. We're full employment, but we're still seeing wage stagnation. That's because the tax bill didn't fix everything, and people know it, and it's not their ticket for keeping the majority. So now there's talk of another tax bill, but they're a dysfunctional Congress, so it's hard to see exactly what they're going to do.
True.
Right? This one from G. Elliott Morris, a tweet saying, an update to my 2018 House forecasting model will put Democratic probability of winning the majority of seats north of 70%. Stay tuned. He hasn't written it up and checked all the different permutations yet of how that could go, but he was at 54% or 56%, then it moved up to 63, and now it's closer to 70. So that goes with what I've been telling you about the numbers in regard to the independents and with the enthusiasm, definitely more on the Democratic side still, despite the decision from the Supreme Court last week. Here's another one from Bloomberg. Harley riders are as politically divided as the rest of America. Duh.
No, they can't be. I heard that they were not.
Trump said they all voted for him. Of course, he lies. And part of the media struggle I see still going on is that there are more and more and more voices saying, listen, you can't just repeat what Trump lies about. You know, and they give examples. Don't say Obama's not a Muslim. Because he keeps saying he's a Muslim. He's not a Muslim. Okay. That's not how you do it. Trump said some stuff, but the fact is about Obama's religion, but Obama is in fact a Christian. That's how you say it so that you don't reinforce the lie over and over and over again. So the reporters are talking to each other, even if their editors aren't, about how to get this right and how to do it better, because everybody's realizing that they have a president that lies every day.
Yeah.
We have Susan Collins. We have the saga of Susan Collins. All right. I would not support a nominee who demonstrated hostility to Roe v. Wade, said Susan Collins. So what she's telling them is don't say it out loud. Use your inside voice.
Yes. Everyone calling her out over that this weekend.
Yes, Matthew Iglesias says Collins using her massive leverage to insist on a nominee who's willing to dissemble about her intentions is the most Susan Collins thing ever.
Yes, please lie to me. I need that.
Right? We have the whole story of the reporter who was at the Capitol Gazette, wrote a lovely, lovely piece about that experience. This is America. Do something about it. I watched John McNamara die. I had to step over Wendy Winters to escape. I said the F word on CNN. If you're upset about the expletive and not that someone killed almost every editor at the Capitol, 5 people who were deeply loved and irreplaceable, you are not an American. If your help ends at thoughts and prayers, I don't want them. What I want is action.
Okay.
So that was, I think, pretty straightforward. We have information here from Gallup. More Americans than ever are comfortable with a government-based health care. It's basically 50-50 or 48-47 for the first time. That's from the Pundit Roundup. And the other thing is U.S. partisan differences on favorable views of the NRA are wider than they've ever been. 86% of Republicans have a favorable view and 24% of Democrats. So it's an incredibly huge partisan gap and reflects the fact that Americans have actually realized that the NRA is a partisan organization.
Yeah. Hello. You're right. Okay. Well, I'm glad that people have woken up to it. It wasn't necessarily on people's radar.
No, but it's just grown over the years, so it's nice to see it is where it is now. And the NRA, for the most part in polls, actually is underwater and has an unfavorable view. Ben Wicklet talked about the marches that happened over the weekend.
Yes, we have.
Antler, North Dakota, population 27, had 15 people protesting Trump's anti-family immigration policy today.
Yes. Good job. And
very polite.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Still.
15 in Antler, North Dakota, tweets Mariana Hatton. Very polite. ND style, you know. And the biggest little protest of anywhere today.
I guess so. There weren't very many people left to be on the other side, and those guys didn't show. It doesn't say anything about what happened to the other 12.
Right. Let's see what else. Lindsey Graham warns against overturning Roe v. Wade. You don't overturn precedent unless there's a good reason. That would be a good topic for you and Armando someday, because precedent should never be overturned except if you feel like overturning it.
Right. Don't do it unless you do.
Don't do it unless you have a reason. And if you have reason, it's fine.
Right. And if you don't have a reason, then you could do that too.
Right. And then finally, Mari Uehara, Uyehara.
I see. Yes.
In GQ writes, blacklist every last one of them. The Washington establishment, tuck-tutting restaurants and customers about letting Sanders, Nielsen, and Stephen Miller eat in peace want to enforce servility, not civility, of a non-white, working class to powerful government officials who are quite literally ripping immigrants from their families, harassing them at their place of work, and hunting them down on our highways and byways for the color of the skin. The David Axelrods of the world believe the immigrants and their sympathizers should be forced to cook for, serve, and clean up after their very own abusers in silence. Their outrage lies with protecting the comforts and needs of the powerful while accepting that the vicious dehumanization of most vulnerable among us is somehow politics as usual. Now, I read somewhere, I think it was Chris Geidner had online, that there was a treasure trove of legal documents that was discovered in a safe somewhere about the Montgomery boycotts. Rosa Parks and all that sort of stuff, the actual arrest warrant and this, that, and everything else. And just a reminder that people were polite without necessarily being civil in the way that people are meaning it now.
That's true.
Everybody has this retrospective look that, that Martin Luther King, he was so nice and polite. We just need more of that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, he led a march on Washington and boycotts. And just read Letter from Birmingham Jail if you really think that, it was all about just being polite and civil. It was not.
Yeah. For some reason, they don't really, I guess there's limited time to teach the entirety of United States history.
I know, but what bothers me more than anything else is when they take an event and they just completely change the context. Maxine Waters asked for nonviolent protest, they say she's inciting violence.
Right.
That's the problem. If the restaurant owner decides to politely, quietly, without making a big deal, ask them to leave but comps the dinner, then it becomes, they were horribly treated by this organization. Right. No, none of that happened. What are you talking about? I get that they say that, but why are the reporters and everybody else going along with that crap?
I think it has to do with the way we learn that history in high school or whenever you learn that, and even earlier when they're discussing Martin Luther King, even with the grade school kids, Martin Luther King Day is coming, kids. I got to tell you who Martin Luther King was, and the answer is he, civil rights leader, yes, but they'll tell you about nonviolent, non-cooperation and that doctrine, and to explain it to young kids means doing things nicely and not being violent and fighting about it. And we just kind of grow up like that was pleasant. And
Martin Luther King, he was a very important figure. You should learn about him. You know what he did? He gave us Martin Luther King Day. So he gave you guys an extra day off of school. And that's about all we're going to tell you about him. The rest you can find out when you're grown up.
Yeah, or they give you the most basic summation possible. Nonviolent is good, and so that's that. And so you come to think of it as magical, as opposed to, it wasn't violent, but first of all, nonviolent what? Non-cooperation. When has that ever been civil? Non-cooperation.
And that goes back, so now you hear people like David Gergen, who should know better because he's old enough, saying we need to be civil the way we were in the 60s.
Yeah, nobody ever bothered you.
Yeah, right.
Sure.
Kent State, Chicago, 68, protests at the Olympics, Black Power movement. Yeah, none of that.
Right.
Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm X. It was all totally plain.
Yes, absolutely. Everyone was comfortable with it. That was the whole point.
Yeah, a few people got shot here and there. But other than that, it's just like today.
Right. Including the people who said, be nonviolent. But, okay. Well,
so that's a little bit of a rant, but that's how I'm going to end the show today. It's very annoying watching, again, people who should know better covering this. Reporters
was a
need
real
to add
surprise.
context to what they're doing. And if they don't, of course, the bloggers will. That's been true forever. So I hope you have a wonderful vacation. I hope you have
Me
a
too.
fantastic time. You know,
Thank you.
50 is a good age. And
Okay, I'll
I
take
hope
it.
you enjoy every second of the skier and all the other things you end up eating in Iceland, the very, very fresh food.
Fish.
And I'll see you when you get back someday.
Yeah, right. And I will, I don't know what. I'll bring home.
I'll just keep calling in and saying, I
see.
forgot. I forgot.
Yeah,
Stop
well,
there, I
enjoy
forgot.
that. And yeah, I don't know. I could. I was been thinking a lot about it. I don't think I can manage a show from Iceland, but
Right,
what can you
but
do?
the part is when you get back, you have to tell me
Yes,
because you're going to be back, and I'm going to go, I forgot.
right. And that's right. Although you'll still be calling. Eventually, all I'll have to do is answer
Yeah,
Skype,
eventually.
and you'll be there.
Just ringing all that time. Take
Okay,
care, and
thank
I'll
you.
talk to you in a couple of weeks.
All
Have a
right.
great vacation.
Thanks, and you stay cool. It's in a heat wave over here in the eastern half of the United States. Very hot weather, and apparently no escaping it no matter how far north you go. All right. Well, that is interesting, and a nice pot shot at David Axelrod. And I felt bad there for a second. Does David Axelrod really believe that immigrants and their sympathizers should be forced to cook for, serve, and clean up after their very own abusers in silence? And I feel like that's the sort of thing that David Axelrod would say. Wait a minute. No, I don't really believe that. I simply believe, but how else do you describe it, really? I mean, what is it about a restaurant that makes... You know what? Interestingly enough, I mean, I wonder. Ask Axelrod. Where was Axelrod on... I don't know. I mean, he may have been on the right side, whatever that side might actually be, on when Republicans were accusing college campus activists of demanding safe spaces, I guess. That somehow restaurant-based protest is like out of bounds. People need to be able to enjoy their meals in peace. You're going to give them acid reflux. That's tantamount to violence. I'll give them a Nexium and they'll have to get an earful. That's all. Well, you might give them a headache. Well, then fine. Tylenol and Nexium. Well, if you mix the two, you never know what sort of interaction. Oh, come on, Dr. Axelrod. That can't be your real concern. But, I mean, how do you escape from that? He is essentially saying, well, you should just be voting and then keeping your mouth shut the rest of the time. That can't possibly be it either. So I don't know. I think he's just caught up in so much garbage. Is essentially, I guess he wants to be able to eat in peace, and he might be at the same restaurant. I don't really know what motivated him to do that. But again, we're not in the same restaurants as those people either. As I observed, I guess last week, I don't even know when the last time I would have been in a restaurant where the owner was actually available, who wasn't the franchise owner and therefore relatively disempowered from ejecting me from the premises anyway, at least on political grounds. I don't know. Seems like a very weird thing. As a matter of fact, I have a contribution from Paula Appenese, who had sent something last week, and it was a lot, it was a hotter topic, of course. It was about the whole red hen incident. And, everything that needed to be said had largely been said in a great flurry of these things. But I do have that contribution ready to roll. And I think I want to jump back a week and think a little bit more about that now that I've been reminded about that, and let her take the reins of the show for a few minutes here while we organize thoughts and see if this launches some commentary along the way.
Morning, David. As the debate rages over the red hen incident, I have a couple of thoughts to offer, in no particular order. 1. Republicans have no problem with Democrats being kept out of restaurants or bathrooms or being kept from getting their birth control from Walgreens, etc. They have no problem at all with making lives difficult for people when it is them doing the difficulty making and other people being on the receiving end. But they really hate being on the receiving end themselves. Which is why I think red hens should pop up every place that Trump officials go. 2. The GOP is composed of two factions, the deplorables and the rest. It's time for the rest to be forced to choose. Do you want to swim in the cesspool with the deplorables, or do you want to be accepted by decent society? You can no longer have it both ways. 3. It doesn't matter which Trump atrocity the owner of the red hen was responding to. Trump hench people should be hounded out of polite society for every Trump policy and atrocity. They've committed so many atrocities so far, partly because of complicit Republicans not having to pay any real prices. And one kind of price to me is social rejection. Social rejection is something that any of us can do. It is a weapon that we have. And I think individuals should begin to do any version and variation of rejection of Republicans in their personal lives that they can do. 4. Nonviolent resistance has to be more than officially sanctioned marches and actions and op-eds, because Republicans can't ignore those things and do. Resistance needs to interfere with daily life and bother them. I think Republicans from top to bottom need to spend every day feeling defensive and wondering who might reject them next. And by the way, rejection doesn't itself have to be violent or vulgar or impassioned. You can simply say, I cannot associate with Trump supporters. I cannot accept the extreme immorality of what you are supporting. As long as you vote for Republicans, you are empowering Nazis, and nothing is going to get better. Go in peace. We can meet again when this is over. I think a little rejection of a lot of Republicans would go a long way. 5. The counterargument is that strong acts of rejection will just solidify Trump support. Well, we know nothing is going to shift the hardcore Trumpers, so let's forget them. What about the rest of those Republicans? Well, some of them may become more defensive and vote GOP, but I bet you they would anyway. But I think a lot of them are just going to be bummed out and demoralized. What they're going to be wanting more than anything else is a return to an environment where being a Republican isn't a liability or an issue. So they may begin demanding that their leaders do something to get this mess cleaned up and get Trump out of the White House. And if they don't, either way, whatever, what we know is we shouldn't be spending time worrying about Republicans, how they feel about anything or what they are going to do. Our job is to keep our side motivated and to attract new voters from people that haven't previously voted, not from people who already have hardened Republican allegiance. 6. Perhaps we'll find out later which tactics we used created outcomes we like and which didn't. But right now, what we know is this. The GOP has been abusing us all for 40-plus years with impunity. Boiled down, their messaging has been, we hate everyone and everything Democratic, liberal, progressive, and we want to hurt you. So, let's just say we've gotten the message. Message has been received, and now we decide how we're going to respond. Thanks for listening. This is Paula from paulawriter.com.
Thank you, Paula. And I think, well worth the reminder of what happened last week rather than simply leaving it behind. I think that those actions should probably continue, and that's a great perspective on it. And a good point, right? The rejection doesn't have to be violent or even vulgar, although I don't know that I would even bother advising you not to make it vulgar, but I suppose read the room, check out where you are, and what sort of effect you're likely to have with that. But certainly the politest possible rejection is still rejection and still meant to be felt. They may respond to you with vulgarity, in which case I guess you're supposed to think you won, and maybe you really did. I don't know. That's all based on whether or not you think the observations of the press elite are really, valuable to you or not. Do you want to win their admiration? That's one way to do it. Of course, you could just wing it and do it your way and not be bothered by it one way or the other. Anyway, just thank you for the reminder, and always worth checking in with you, Paula. Thanks for the contribution. Let's see. We got another break coming up shortly, but perhaps we can share another story or two before the break. I'll choose this one. It comes from The Hill, which probably means they borrowed it from somewhere else, but I always open up The Hill's pieces because of the photos they choose to illustrate their stories. This is probably one of the worst photos of Donald Trump in a long time. And there's been a couple of really horrible ones. In fact, there was one just the other day. It was horrific. He's so orange. It's crazy. This one he's not. This one he hasn't been tanning, and he's pale and actually kind of sickly looking, if you ask me. And it's one of the more interesting photos floating around of him. Anyway, I don't think it has anything to do with the story other than the fact that Donald Trump is in it. Trump asks Saudi Arabia to increase oil production. And guess what? They're not doing it. This is Alicia Cohn has written this one up for The Hill. Does it say what she's depending on here? What's her original source? Oh, well, there's a tweet, among other things, that she's depending on. I just sort of thought it was interesting, having read the story. Well, we'll breeze through it as quickly as can. President Trump on Saturday said he asked King Salman of Saudi Arabia to increase oil production, maybe up to 2 million barrels, in order to bring prices down. Just spoke to King Salman of Saudi Arabia, he's tweeting, and explained to him that because of the turmoil and dysfunction in Iran and Venezuela, I am asking that Saudi Arabia increase oil production, maybe up to 2 million barrels, to make up the difference. Price is too high, he misspelled too, of course. He has agreed, he ends, he adds at the end of his tweet. Now, it is rare for the U.S. to make a specific request for an output hike. I guess it is. I'm not really sure it is. I will point out this is the second Republican president in a row, and both of them pretty dumb at that, but the second Republican president in a row who has insisted, aloud, in front of everyone, that he had such a special relationship with Saudi Arabia that he could bring down gas prices simply by picking up the phone and calling the king of Saudi Arabia and asking them to do it. And neither one of them were able to do it. I don't know if you recall George W. Bush and his promise that he would just, if gas prices got too high, he'd just call Saudi Arabia. Just call them and tell them to turn on the spigots. Open up the spigots, he might have said. And, of course, that never happened. And guess what? It didn't happen here. And guess what? The Saudi government has confirmed that there was the conversation, but has said, yeah, there was no agreement to actually do that thing. So I don't think so. We'll be right back, and I've forgotten to turn on the music. It sounds like this. We'll be right back after this 1-minute break, which I'll really have to watch the music on. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Got a different part of the music that we are returning on because of my having forgotten to start the music on time going into the break, but you know that, and it's not adding any value to the show. So let's just fade that music out and promise to do better next time, or at least promise to try to do better. Anyway, let's see. That really concludes the most important facts, I guess, about the story of his calling the king of Saudi Arabia, which is, I guess this is the news. Donald Trump said, although he didn't mention calling him on the phone, he says, I just spoke to King Salman of Saudi Arabia, and I don't know how they would have done that without the phone, because he's not here, and neither is Trump there. So this, though, is the big history, the big news in this is that Donald Trump said he spoke to someone important on the phone, and that someone confirmed that they did speak. Because very often the story is, I just talked to so-and-so on the phone, or so-and-so called me, or came up to me and said, and it turns out that they didn't even have that conversation, much less that the conversation was about what Trump says it was about. Still, an unbroken streak of lying about something that took place during the conversation because it was a phone call. And this is something you should watch out for all the time. One of Trump's most obvious tells, I think, is whenever he says that there was a private conversation of any kind with him. And remember, this is not to be taken, this shouldn't be coming as a surprise to you. Remember the story, for instance, that eventually, while he was in private life, his own lawyers would refuse to take one-on-one meetings with him because they felt like they always needed a second lawyer to act as a witness to what was said during the conversations. Donald Trump's MO, really, is to have private conversations with people and then simply make public pronouncements insisting that something that works to Donald Trump's advantage was what was actually said during the conversation, counting on its nature as a private conversation for safeguard against the other person being able to prove that Donald Trump is lying. Now, in the context of being President of the United States, there are lots of complications with that, including the very public keeping of records that, track who he speaks to in person and on the phone, even if those records aren't always easily accessible by reporters. But it's a relatively simple thing to do to find out whether or not the president spoke to another world leader by telephone or any other device and verify it. And of course, these days he's speaking to other people who very frequently don't feel bound by either any agreement with him or any disadvantage that they suffer vis-a-vis Donald Trump in whatever context and setting. They feel like they can speak out and say, yeah, that didn't happen. So an unbroken streak, though, about mischaracterizing the discussion. Trump, of course, says that he spoke to King Salman, explained to him that they should increase oil production, and he has agreed. And as I mentioned, they say, no, we have not. And just like George W. Bush thought he could get him to turn on the spigots, it turns out that they are an independent entity and they sort of are more interested in doing their own thing over there in Saudi Arabia. Lots of additional information about Saudi Arabia and what's going on there and some of the context to it, I can tell you, during the next couple of days on into next week. A few of the hours of material I've been able to record. I haven't yet been able to cobble them into coherent shows, but I've been reading a lot of our archived stories. Lots of information about the situation in the Middle East at large, Saudi Arabia in particular, Qatar, of course, making appearances, and Venezuela in the appearances as well. So lots tied up in this. I am rubbing my hands in anticipation of the shows coming up during my absence. What day are they coming up? I don't know. I have yet to engineer that. We'll figure it out. You just tune in and be surprised. Okay. Here's a story that I thought we would share. There's a couple looming out there, some of which are very fresh stories, but which are extraordinarily long reads. And I might save that possibly for tomorrow. And I know at least one of these stories Armando is very interested in. So we might see whether he's available for discussion of that story, or maybe he just wants to sit and listen along with you. But if not tomorrow, then, some of these stories are long and involved enough to make podcasts out of almost all by themselves. Let me bring you this one, though, because this one could easily fall by the wayside. ProPublica had a very interesting, made a very interesting discovery. I don't know when they made it, but they reported it. Oh, actually, it was some time ago. No, it wasn't. What am I thinking? I'm looking at it. I'm losing track of what month it is at this point. It's June 28th. That's the end of last week. I don't know why. I guess it just feels like a lifetime ago. This needs to be added to the conversation. I haven't seen a lot of discussion of it, and it is important. And you'll appreciate it. Oh yes, so there's Armando. I heard my name. Tomorrow? Yeah, tomorrow's a great day for it. And I'll share with you a story that you pointed out to me over the weekend, and I also had been tipped off to by one of our good friends on Twitter and a listener, Kurt, who tweets as Audible Video, and he shared this terrific story breaking out of the UK, which we always need to keep an eye on. It's not a Brexit story, it's not a Trump-Russia story, but it is a Trump story, and it might be a Trump-Russia story. Those of you who read the papers over the weekend probably know which one we're talking about. I feel like we need to give it some time to read through it. It's a long article and digest it. In the meantime, I want to share with you this story from ProPublica. Gabriel Sandoval has written this one up. These Trump staffers, including an ex-NRA lobbyist, left their financial disclosure forms blank. Like blank. I'm not playing Match Game 76 with you. You don't need to complete the sentence. They left the disclosure forms blank. This is like stunning, but then for the Trump administration, not stunning. But this is like a true YOLO, LOL, nothing matters story. Because, as you know, we all go about our daily lives thinking, well, in order to serve in government, you have to fill out a financial disclosure form. And you got it. You have to fill it out. And because if you don't, and this is where we say, if you don't, then what? We don't even really know what happens because it never goes this way because people don't simply, as far as we know, people don't simply say, I don't want to fill that out. And let whatever happens, happens. We'll find out what happens. Now, there's a procedure, and I guess if you're one out of hundreds of thousands of people all over the place who, have refused to fill these things out, not 100,000, but if everybody else has filled them out and you haven't, then I guess the powers that be could say, here's a chance to do our jobs. Let's take care of it. You can't go around not filling out your forms. But I guess if everybody does it, then they just say, well, what are we going to do? Close the government? This is where we find out that sometimes laws that we think are inviolate, we find out there's no enforcement mechanism for this. There's no teeth to it. And even if there are teeth to it, it's such, the system is so underutilized and ossified, they don't even know what to do when they find a blatant violation. Check this story out. The Interior Department acknowledges that many of its employees' forms, quote, were not reviewed and certified properly, end quote. That's the subheader of this story. Now into the body of it, as unbelievable as it is. Before accepting a position at the U.S. Department of the Interior last October, Benjamin Cassidy, you've never heard of him, right? And now that you've heard his name, you still don't know who he is, and you'll likely forget before the end of the paragraph what his name was, and he's counting on that. But his name is Benjamin Cassidy. Before he joined the U.S. Department of the Interior, Benjamin Cassidy championed gun rights for nearly 7 years as a lobbyist for the National Rifle Association, collecting a peak annual salary of $288,333 for his work on Capitol Hill. The public wouldn't know that by looking at Cassidy's government financial disclosure report. The form, which he filed soon after taking a job as a senior deputy director of the Office of Intergovernmental and External Affairs, doesn't list his old job at the NRA, or any past job, for that matter. Cassidy's form was nearly blank, save for his name, title, and some bank holdings and investments. In the space allotted to show his income, it incorrectly stated none. And nobody does a goddamn thing about it, essentially. There is a, what did they use? Document cloud capture from the actual disclosure reports, which I guess are electronic. And there you can look at it for yourself. There's nothing there. Federal law requires, supposedly, nearly all executive branch employees to submit reports intended to reveal and resolve conflicts of interest that might arise from their personal finances. The reports are supposed to be carefully reviewed, preferably by agency ethics attorneys, before being made public. Of course, remember that part of the plan here is Donald Trump doesn't have any of those jobs filled because he doesn't care about doing the jobs that they're supposed to be doing. Why would he appoint people to review the financial disclosure forms of the people he's hired if he doesn't think financial disclosure is of any interest to anyone, and you ought not to be forced to do it anyway? Continuing with the article, after we asked the Interior Department about the failure of Cassidy and at least 3 other staffers, and that's not a huge number, right, to disclose their work histories and finances, the agency responded with a bullet-pointed assessment that acknowledged ongoing problems while also noting that they, quote, predated the current administration, unquote. We'll see what that's supposed to mean. 3 isn't a very big number, but then, of course, there probably isn't a very large number of people that Donald Trump has actually put at the Interior Department at all. That might represent the sum total of people he's placed at the Interior Department. And most of the people at the Interior Department probably have full financial disclosures on file because most of them are career employees and filed them under previous administrations, despite the claims from the who gave out this answer. I don't even know. But whoever was speaking on behalf of the Interior Department said, oh, these problems predate the current administration. So, among the department's findings, and here's the bullet points. The Interior Department's Ethics Office did not, quote, have adequate resources to accomplish its legally required compliance functions, including its responsibilities relating to the Financial Disclosure Report Program, unquote. Now, we don't know whether that's by design in the Trump administration, although we think we do. We think we know that. But it probably did predate this administration. It was probably an understaffed office anyway, for a number of reasons. I would probably guess that the combination of reasons that led to something of an understaffing is, one, anxiousness about budgeting and the desire, as foolish as it may be, for Democratic administrations to look like they're being what Republicans like to call fiscally responsible, even though they don't really know what that means and we're never able to exercise it. You want to be able to say, well, we've cut our budget XYZ, and how can you really do it? And if you're loath to cut at the programmatic level, you could say, well, maybe we don't hire anybody to replace the 3 people in the ethics office who left, because after all, our people are generally pretty ethical. They file financial disclosure forms and they file them faithfully, and there's very little reason to believe that, say, the bulk of the people there, career employees, have been, raking in millions from some conflicting source out there. They're just basic, straight-ahead government employees, and the people who are there as political appointees, though they may have been political hacks that we chose to place in these jobs, they just generally are going to follow the effing instructions on the financial disclosure form, whereas Donald Trump's people are not going to do that. They're not even going to put anything down. And now you're going to find out the real difference in norms between all previous administrations and this one. The old norm was, look, you're required to file these things. And besides which, I have nothing to be embarrassed about. I did what I did, and I'm okay with it. And also, no one ever finds out. Who's going to find out about the, what's his name, Benjamin Cassidy's of the world? Nobody. Nobody will bother to look. And if ProPublica were foolish enough to decide to waste its time looking at the financial disclosure forms of everybody in the department, they would very quickly find that there's nothing obviously amiss here. And unless you're looking for one person in particular to try to find if they have a conflict of interest, going through the financial disclosure forms of the Interior Department, you might find some things that you'd say, well, that seems like a conflict of interest, but it is disclosed here. I mean, you would come up with something and say, there's a person who works in the Interior Department and they're overseeing national parks and, whatever, regulations about, I'll make something up, clean air, clean water in national parks. That's an important thing for national parks. But they used to be a lobbyist for a group that wanted to loosen those regulations. Now, that might possibly fly as a story in the environmental community, maybe. But the most you can say about it is, well, this person used to lobby for them, and we think that you should be keeping an eye on this person because, after all, they just loosened regulations, and they used to lobby for that all the time. And isn't that weird and troubling? But then it doesn't go any further than that because they've disclosed, they've put that out there as required by law, and you can now write these stories, but you can't write the story of the scandal of their trying to hide their previous lobbying experience, which is a much more important story, like this one. But even this, in this administration, this is a nothing story. But anyway, very interesting that they've apparently gotten the word that, now the new norm is, well, you know what? Why just don't disclose? They'll probably not even be able to find the time or space to run this story anywhere important. ProPublica is important, but I'll bet you anything, I would imagine 99% of the country has no idea that this is going on. I didn't, and I think we're pretty politically aware. Who would know? Thank God there are reporters who will do this stuff and go and check. I mean, that's digging, unless they got a hint that wasn't, and even so what? So they got a tip. If I got that tip, you wouldn't find me looking in the archives for this stuff. You would find me saying, somebody ought to look into this. And I guess it's ProPublica that's going to do it. Anyway, let's see. Just one ethics specialist who is not an attorney. We left off by saying that the Interior Department's ethics office was understaffed, right? So you would probably cut there. Just to connect all the thoughts, you would probably cut your budget there if you wanted to cut the budget of the Interior Department, because that person wasn't likely to find anything anyway. And even if they did, it was a yawner of a story. So why don't we just let attrition take care of the budget for us in that office? So now we're in a situation where there's hardly anybody there, plus a situation where it's like active administration policy, let's undermine our ethics offices anyway. And at least the people who would otherwise be understaffed and overburdened there will now not quit and not feel overburdened because there's no paperwork for them to review, so they can just sit there and collect their paychecks. So there's where we are right now. The Interior Department's ethics office didn't have adequate resources to do this. Just one ethics specialist, it says here, who is not an attorney, is responsible for reviewing hundreds of reports and advising thousands of employees on issues relating to those reports. This contributed to the certification and release of inaccurate reports, both because it wouldn't have been possible to check them for accuracy even if they cared, and they don't care. And in the past, well, they were generally accurate pretty much on their own anyway, because people were generally honest. Not so in this administration. Second bullet point, government employees are responsible for their accuracy of their forms, but Interior's ethics office, quote, is culpable in certifying forms that appeared blank without conducting a certain level of due diligence to ensure that the filers submitted correct forms. So we have, what's his name? I already keep forgetting, and now I'm intentionally forgetting his name, Benjamin Cassidy. We've got his name, but we don't have the name of the person so far, maybe later in the article we'll get it, who is culpable in certifying his forms. Next bullet point, 4 Interior staffers ultimately had to resubmit their disclosure reports following ProPublica's inquiry. So good for you, ProPublica. As part of that process, they were interviewed by senior career ethics attorneys who went over their reports with them. The interviews revealed some staffers, quote, were confused about what information was supposed to be reported, unquote, according to the agency's statement. And that's probably the most generous possible spin you could put on it. I was confused. It asked me for my other jobs, and I said, I don't have any other jobs. I'm working here. Yeah, we meant in the past. Oh, I was so confused about that. Well, I haven't had any. Yes, you have. Oh, right, I have. I was confused about that. Yeah, so what were those jobs? Oh, I don't actually remember. That's the problem. I was fired because I kept forgetting to show up for work. All right, because this game could go on forever. Other employees, last bullet point here, other employees, quote, thought they had filled out the form correctly, when in fact they had not. None of them appeared to intentionally hide information they were required to disclose, the department said. Again, all I did is I put my name and my address and what bank I have a savings account at. I didn't know I was supposed to fill all these things in. Oh, I thought I did fill in all these things with invisible ink. Yeah, sure. All right, whatever. Many of the problems and omissions were easy to spot because the forms were blank. For example, an attorney for the DOI, Department of the Interior's Bureau of Land Management, everyone's favorite bureau, Callie Younger, submitted her financial disclosure form in September, days after joining the agency, right on time. An ethics official, Tia Barner, here's a name finally, reviewed and approved the form, concluding that it complied with federal law. But Younger's form was blank, apart from her electronic signature and some perfunctory investment details. It completely neglected basic employment information, just such as her old job as an attorney in Idaho Governor Butch Otter's office. Aha, you hear me? Are you listening, Joan? Ironically, it also left out Younger's past role as a, quote, public records ombudsman in Idaho, whose mission included examining how the state's public record laws could be improved. Oh, I don't know. Maybe by compliance. So the Idaho State Public Records official comes to Washington and says, I didn't fill in any of my records. I didn't realize that records needed to be kept. Well, I'm just an unfrozen caveman records officer from Idaho. Do you know who Callie Younger is? Doesn't everybody know? Everybody else in Idaho, isn't that one of those states? All right, it's a little larger than, say, Vermont, where everyone is rumored to know one another, or New Hampshire, where everyone serves in the state legislature together. After we asked about the batch of blank forms, a senior ethics official, Kim Hintz, or maybe Hintz, I don't know, Hintz, determined that Younger, quote, inadvertently omitted certain information. A revised version of her form now includes more employment and financial information. Younger should have been questioned by ethics officials when she filed her original form, said Don Fox, who served as acting director of the U.S. Office of Government Ethics during the Obama administration. It may be, honestly, she just didn't read the instructions and she just started filling out paperwork, Fox said, because if you've done even a cursory review of the instructions, she should have known that she was supposed to have listed her position with the state of Idaho. Younger's original form was a veritable font of information compared to one, and remember it was blank, compared to one filed in the name of Thomas Baptiste, who is now an advisor to the Bureau of Land Management. Baptiste's form was completely blank, with no information beyond his name and no signature or indication that it was reviewed or approved. Baptiste previously worked as a records manager, for Donald Trump's presidential campaign, as a project director at a consulting firm that works for conservative political clients, and before that at Tepeyac OBGYN, which calls itself a pro-life obstetrics and gynecology medical practice. What is he doing in the Bureau of Land Management? I don't know. What did he do for an OBGYN office? I have no idea. And he won't tell you because it's not even on his records. That's an amazing thing. I don't know what Thomas Baptiste does, but now people who are interested should be looking it up. What does Thomas Baptiste do at the Bureau of Land Management? Is it in conflict with any of his prior employment situations? And the answer is we don't know, or we didn't know until ProPublica did this report, because we don't know that he worked anywhere. They literally blank form. Was he doing the work? Was he making the policy? Yes. Was he supposed to be able to do that according to federal law? No. Was he doing it anyway? Yes. What are they going to do about it? Well, you fill in those forms, young man. We're very upset about this. You're going to have a mandatory meeting with an ethics advisor who will help do your work for you. What a punishment. Hintz or Heinz, whatever this person's name is, the Interior Department ethics staffer, found that Baptiste had, quote, inadvertently omitted certain information. They basically, shouldn't we do some investigation? We should, but we're so overburdened here. I'm the only staffer. How about everybody whose form is blank inadvertently omitted certain information? Good. I don't think that there's any way they can prove either that the omissions weren't inadvertent or that we simply decided not to do the investigations. If we swear and sign the correct paperwork that says we did, then the presumption is that we did, and unless they have some compelling evidence that will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that we didn't, then I think we're off the hook. And so they are, my guess. Yet another completely blank report was submitted, this one by Rick May, who worked with veterans after leaving active military duty in 2010 and is now a senior advisor to Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke. May erred when he didn't list his wife's income in his December filing, the Interior Department said. It was unclear whether other relevant information was not included in the original version, since the DOI did not make May's updated report available to ProPublica before this article was published. Cassidy, Baptiste, Hintz or Heinz, May, and Younger, guess what? They didn't respond to ProPublica's request for comment. They left that blank, you see. The failure to properly check federal financial disclosures could result in substantive conflicts going unnoticed, said Virginia Cantor, a former Obama administration ethics attorney who now works for the nonprofit Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. She acknowledged that forms sometimes fall through the cracks, particularly given the volume of ethics issues arising in the Trump administration and the heavy workload of ethics offices. As ProPublica has reported, failing to file the report correctly or completely can lead to serious consequences. It's true. There are consequences. It's not that they left them out of the law. It's just, will they be brought to bear? Federal prosecutors can bring a civil lawsuit against any employee who willfully and knowingly submits a false report, with a fine of up to $50,000 and a year in prison, which is a pretty stiff penalty. So it's not that the law is toothless. It's that the problem lies in the enforcement. If your department is willing to lie for you and and put out a report that says, well, you inadvertently left it blank, well, that's a problem if the law requires that a civil lawsuit could only be brought against any employee who willfully and knowingly submits a false report. So you don't even get a civil lawsuit. A civil lawsuit can't even be filed to figure out, really, whether you're willful about it or just forgetful. It just says that. That's just one of the presumptions. This goes a long way back. We'll talk about it after this break. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, where we last left off. We were, I was making an offhand comment about this, but it shouldn't be offhand. It's a very large, overarching story behind this story. And I said it goes back a ways. And it's something we discussed for a long time in the context of even as far back as the U.S. Attorney's scandal, and pointing out that very often, this and the undermining of voting rights in the voter rights section over at the Department of Justice, the weakness and faults in the law that were originally crafted when we were still operating under these norms about, people aren't just going to intentionally violate federal law willy-nilly, as it were, because people would be embarrassed to be caught being in violation of federal law. And that's long since fallen by the wayside. But like with, I guess probably the better example is the voting rights stuff and facially discriminatory redistricting plans and gerrymandering and the like. And that the law is, the state of the law has always been, that when a state files a redistricting plan following a census, that it will do so certainly now under the law, with the full expectation that the plan will be reviewed at the Department of Justice. The big assumption is one that, I guess there wasn't an assumption that the state would do what it could to refrain from filing a discriminatory plan, because they wouldn't have written this statute if they really believed that was the case. But the assumption was that the professional staff at the voting rights section, and even the political appointees that oversaw their work, would be conscientious about enforcing the legal rights to vote of the people who had been traditionally suppressed, basically in the former Confederate states, is what it comes down to. And that even Republican administrations post-Southern strategy wouldn't just simply leverage the law on the federal level to impose discriminatory redistricting plans on minority populations in the South. And that broke down pretty quickly. But most spectacularly, I think, beginning in the George W. Bush administration, when the DOJ and its voting rights section political appointees took great advantage of the way the law was written, which was basically that though it was always available as a remedy to people in those states if they felt like they were having their votes suppressed or minimized, to sue over a state's redistricting plan, there was the provisions of the law were that the plans from these monitored states were to be submitted to the voting rights section at DOJ for initial review. And the non-partisan, non-political attorneys who were very concerned personally, because that's why they sought out and took these jobs, were very concerned personally with making sure that everyone was had equal access to representation and their votes weren't diluted or suppressed. And they would review the plans fairly, and if they passed muster with them, they would let their political appointee bosses know that that was the case. Political appointee bosses, as much as they might like to suppress the votes of minorities in the South, knew that it would reflect so poorly on the administration if they simply did something like that, that they would be fired by the president, mortified at having been caught out as a racist. Not true anymore. And so the presumption in the law was exploited. That presumption was that if the voting rights section chiefs, and here we're talking about political appointees, found that the laws were not facially discriminatory against minorities, whether because they believed that to be the case genuinely or they had been advised by earnest and honest career attorneys in the voting rights section that that was the case, or whatever, if they certified that that was the case, that would not immunize the state from suit, but it would raise the level, it would change the game for people filing suit. Instead of simply being able to make some sort of demonstration of harm, they now had to show that the decision to call this plan, to refrain from labeling this plan as facially discriminatory was itself reached by some arbitrary and capricious method, that there wasn't a real honest review of the plan done, or that political interference had changed the outcome, or whatever. You needed to show, though, that there was no rational basis for approving the plan, because it became pretty obvious pretty quickly in the George W. Bush administration that the voting rights section career attorneys who really cared about this stuff and were really steeped in civil rights and voting rights law said very quickly that many of these plans, particularly the ones coming out of Texas, were in fact facially discriminatory against minorities. They absolutely, positively, beyond a shadow of a doubt, diluted minority votes, period. That's what they were designed to do, and they successfully did it. The bosses, the political appointees that ran the voting rights section, overruled the career attorneys and said, the signature on this that matters is mine, and I say that these things are not facially discriminatory, and that's the determination that counts when it comes to figuring out whether the burden of evidence, the burden of proof for those suing the state insisting that the new plans are facially discriminatory would have to overcome. We have to show not that there's evidence that there's discrimination, but rather we have to prove that the decision to approve the plan as not discriminatory was arbitrary and capricious. And that begins, I guess, with an inquiry into the methodologies in the department. And basically they just left things blank, essentially. They left things so vague, and they say, well, for various and sundry reasons, we pondered this and we thought long and hard about it. And we were just at odds with the conclusion of our staffs, and that sometimes happens. But they were able to find language that would satisfy courts, not that the plans themselves necessarily weren't facially discriminatory, but that they cleared the bar with respect to having made the decision arbitrarily or capriciously, or arbitrarily and capriciously, as the case may have been. But, if you lay down enough bull, you can say, well, it's not immediately clear that it was arbitrary and capricious, and so, you've not cleared that hurdle. Now you can try and make your case anyway, but it's probably going to be dismissed at the district court level now that you're unable to meet that burden of proof. So you exploit these things that were, these laws, these parts of the law that were meant to keep things running, expeditiously, so that you didn't get bogged down with enormous lawsuits that lasted for years just because somebody disagreed with an outcome, after there were certain thresholds you had to meet. And so once you find out what those thresholds are, you just lie just enough to make it clear that it's not going to be a no-brainer. It's not going to be an open and shut case. And maybe you win in the end, maybe not. Maybe your suit gets dismissed because you can't prove that it was arbitrary and capricious, whatever the case is. And now here we have the Department of the Interior realizing, well, if you don't fill in your forms, which is what you're supposed to be doing, you could be in big trouble if they find that you willfully refused to fill out the form. Now, if I file a report that says you did it inadvertently, well, then you can't find yourself, you won't find yourself the subject of a civil lawsuit. And I know this not only because the law says that you're not supposed to be the subject of a civil lawsuit unless you did it willfully and knowingly, but in case anybody objects, in case anybody thinks that you might have done it willfully and knowingly and I'm lying, then there's another safeguard. Who's supposed to file civil suits against you? And the answer is me, essentially. The unitary executive. The Department of Justice is Jeff Sessions' Department of Justice under Donald Trump. And all the pressure that Jeff Sessions is under to finally satisfy Donald Trump that he can do this job and stay in this job. Think about that, right? Is he going to start filing suits against people who probably got these jobs because they were friends of Donald Trump or friends of Donald Trump, and they were in on the game all along? And after all, look, the Department of the Interior says it was inadvertent. Are you going to file civil lawsuits against these guys? Not if you want them to stay at the Department of Interior and do whatever it is that an NRA lobbyist and somebody who used to work at a OBGYN, pro-life OBGYN practice is going to do for you at the Department of the Interior. So that's where you're stuck. It's against the law, but so what? What if we just say, LOL, YOLO, nothing matters, there's no law anymore? Well, $50,000 fine and up to a year in prison sounds like a bad thing, unless, of course, the person who's going to do it to you is your buddy at the DOJ, because then he's not going to do it to you. You get where I'm going with this? All right, back to the article. The Office of Government Ethics, or OGE, audited the Interior Department's Ethics Office in 2016, the last full year of the Obama administration, and found multiple problems. Okay, so that's interesting, right? Obama administration had problems. Many Interior Department employees had been filing their financial disclosures late, and the department's ethics office was short-staffed. The report also found that Interior's ethics office wasn't exercising oversight of special government employees, or SGEs, who hold jobs in the private sector while working for the government. In 2015, 4 SGEs at Interior did not file financial disclosure reports, the OGE found. That is serious, and that is the Obama administration, right? In a statement, the OGE said it is still scrutinizing Interior's ethics office as part of its 2016 audit. OGE's policy is to continue to follow up on recommendations until we are satisfied that the agency has addressed those problems underlying the recommendations, the statement said. The Government Accountability Office, a congressional watchdog, not really, they're of course the ones who okayed the emoluments stealing that Donald Trump is doing over at the old post office hotel, but they count themselves a congressional watchdog. The GAO is also auditing aspects of the Interior Department's ethics office, and according to Interior officials, quote, will likely highlight some of the problems, unquote, reported in this article. What do you know? The acting director of strategic issues at GAO, Tran Chao Nguyen, I think is how you actually pronounce that last name, and I think I've run across it before, said the audit will be completed later this year. Under our policies, we can't share with you any findings until that work is completed and issued, Nguyen wrote in an email. I think it's actually pronounced without the N at all, Win, but I don't know. I want that N in there somehow. She added that the audit will evaluate the ethics programs of Interior and other executive branch agencies and the processes and controls in place to oversee ethics compliance for political appointees. Now, it adds parenthetically at the end of the article here, as part of the GAO's review, ProPublica staffers have been interviewed about our political appointee data, including Trump Town and our interactions with federal ethics offices. None of the questions related to information or filings about any specific individual. Very interesting note that they had to add at the end there, but could be problematic. Now, interesting point at the end. Yes, the Obama administration had, I guess, fairly similar problems, although I don't know if they were necessarily similar in scope or in kind. One of the more troubling aspects, though, of course, those special government employees. That seems like a bit of a racket and always has. And, that's a budgetary game there, too. We want people to do the work, but we don't want them to be on the budget of the department necessarily. And then people think that they're serving in sort of a quasi-governmental role. And maybe that doesn't require a financial disclosure, even though it's pretty clear that it does and should. But very interesting. And I don't know if it rises to the level of completely blank financial disclosure forms for people who are heading, sections and bureaus. It should be fairly obvious. Yeah, you're supposed to be filing those things. And, of course, I don't know that anybody really necessarily believes that the Department of Justice under Obama, if somebody just continually refused to file such a report, that you wouldn't find yourself in some sort of trouble. But then again, this Department of Justice every once in a while surprises us in its willingness to put Trump employees and appointees in political jeopardy. So, maybe they'll surprise us again. You never know. And you never know who Donald Trump is going to think is expendable in these situations. All right. Let's see. What else can we add here? Why don't we add something from Daily Kos, as this is Daily Kos Radio, but a good look at things. This will maybe set us up nicely for tomorrow if we do have a discussion with Armando. But I wanted to grab and share with you, and you've likely seen it, but if you haven't, it's time for you to see Rebecca Pilar Buckwalter Poza's piece that no doubt appeared on the front page at some point, although I can't verify it from the mobile account I've been directed to. If Roe goes, Roe v. Wade, gay rights may follow. And that'll worry a lot of us for a lot of reasons, and represent a pretty serious, standing on its head of everything that we thought we knew about truth, justice, and the American way, because 5 people with the right robes on say everything you learned in school is gone now. How so? And this is a pretty good explainer. I think in 1973, the Supreme Court decided Roe v. Wade, legalizing abortion nationwide. Right. So why does it have anything to do with gay rights? Okay, you probably feel it intuitively. Here it comes. Its ruling affected laws in 46 states. If Roe were reversed tomorrow, abortion would become illegal in 20 states immediately, and that number could soon rise. Conservatives who've spent decades targeting Roe will waste no time in trying to get more state laws on the books in anticipation of retiring Justice Anthony Kennedy's seat going to a second Trump-appointed justice. President Trump has promised to nominate only candidates who would reverse Roe. If that happens, not just reproductive freedom, but a host of other rights, most prominently gay rights, will be weakened or eliminated. Now comes the explanation part. Normally I would pause here and say, all right, let me explain why that's the case. But let's trust Rebecca to explain it. I always should be trusting whoever writes the articles to explain it. I'm very often pleasantly surprised when they do. Even though I've been doing this for many years and I've never got the hang of it. I don't know why I should be surprised about these things. Rebecca writes for us for a reason. The court, here's the reasons that she gives, that are set up here. The court decided Roe on the basis of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. It recognized that the clause creates a privacy right. Remember that privacy is not a word that appears in the Constitution. There's no right to privacy. It is created from everyone's understanding of, well, what are all these other things in here doing? They obviously are intended to be understood this way. And strict constructionists say, hey, if the word's not in there, then it's not in there. You can't do that. The big difference between liberal and conservative justices. So The basis, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. It recognized, the court did, that the clause creates a privacy right. The foundation for its ruling is substantive due process. The idea that certain fundamental rights, even if they are not enumerated, are constitutionally protected. Contrary to conservatives' portrayals, substantive due process has been a part of Supreme Court jurisprudence for more than 100 years. While Roe was a giant leap forward, the court had previewed its rationale. In 1965's Griswold v. Connecticut, and this is why you've heard of it, the justices found that the right to use contraception falls under what they called the penumbra, or shadow, of the Bill of Rights. This was a broader, more politically palatable way to invoke substantive due process, which the court attacked in 1963. In Griswold, the court just didn't restrict its understanding of unenumerated but fundamental rights, also known as penumbral rights, because they fall under the penumbra, right? Didn't restrict its understanding of unenumerated but fundamental rights to a single clause. 2 years later, Chief Justice Earl Warren cited a right created within the liberty right in Loving versus Virginia. The liberty right in Loving, the decision declaring laws prohibiting interracial marriage unconstitutional. These statutes, quote from the decision here, these statutes also deprive the Lovings of liberty without due process of law, in violation of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. The freedom to marry has long been recognized as one of the vital personal rights essential to the orderly pursuit of happiness by free men. And of course now we say, by everybody. That decision was based on the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which makes laws targeting race presumptively unconstitutional. But its conclusion is a critical reminder that the court has often found substantive rights within the liberty right. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, etc., all from the Declaration of Independence and not the Constitution, but a fundamental understanding of what America is supposed to be about, right? It's also just an elegant explanation. Substantive due process is what ensures the court protects vital personal rights essential to the orderly pursuit of happiness by free men that our founders didn't think or know to spell out 200 plus years ago. Tactical errors have been made. If it had been up to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who joined the court 2 decades later, the court would have kept building up to legalizing abortion rather than allowing the entirety of the right to rest on one decision. Entirety of the right to an abortion, that is. It is the singularity of the decision that renders it so vulnerable, because both because Roe forced a great deal of change at once and because it may be easier to overturn one case than it would be to negate a line of cases establishing the abortion right bit by bit. But the precedent is robust, not invented, as conservatives claim. Kennedy has been the bulwark against overturning Roe, which was, to conservatives' mind, an unwelcome twist. He started out anti-abortion, their last best hope for overturning Roe until now. Only in 1992, when the court considered Planned Parenthood v. Casey in a direct challenge to abortion rights, did Kennedy flip. And he was hardly a total supporter of reproductive freedom. He was the deciding vote in 2007's Gonzalez v. Carhart, which upheld a late-term abortion ban. If Trump's able to replace Kennedy, there's no doubt the court will criminalize abortion. Roe is not the only case at risk, but it is the most urgent. If Roe falls, abortion regulation will be left to the states. Remember, that's what Roe did, federalized the right. Many states have spent years narrowing abortion rights as much as possible, even with Roe in place. There's no doubt that, as CNN legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin put it, abortion will be illegal in 20 states within 18 months. If Roe falls, that decision may take substantive due process, long the target of conservative jurists, along with it. Or even the notion of penumbral rights altogether. Remember, if 5 of them decide there aren't any penumbral rights, then all this time has been wasted, right? In their view. If so, a second major group will be affected, LGBT Americans. The next section here, and who knows how much further we're going to be able to get in the show here, entitled The Right to Human Dignity, should give you an idea of what's coming up. The substantive due process right, most closely related to the privacy right, also derived from the right to liberty, is the right to dignity. The decision identifying that right arrived in 1971 in an opinion upholding the right of an individual to wear a jacket with an anti-war message, and now ones that say, I don't really care, do you? Justice John M. Harlan wrote that the right to individual choice and expression cannot be doubted. No other approach would comport with the premise of individual dignity and choice upon which our political system rests. It would take 3 decades for the notion of a dignity right to take root, less for the supposed right to go about armed with a bazooka wherever you go. Dignity is at the heart of several major issues, but nowhere is it more important than with respect to gay rights. As of 1983, the court still wasn't on board, unfortunately, and that's when it heard the first major gay rights case, Bowers v. Hardwick. The majority upheld a Georgia anti-sodomy law, as they put it, but Justice John Paul Stevens dissented, planting a seed. Echoing Harlan, he argued that our intimate choices, a matter of individual dignity, are protected by the right to liberty. He distilled the dignity right to an individual's right to decide how he will live his own life. The courts must protect individuals' freedom to choose out of our tradition of respect for the dignity of individual choice in matters of conscience. It took 20 years for the court to shift on dignity. In March 2003, when the court heard Lawrence v. Texas, a challenge to Bowers, in essence, just 2 of the 9 justices who decided Bowers were still on the court, Stevens and Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. The court decided Lawrence 6-3, with 5 justices basing their agreement on the dignity right. Anti-sodomy laws are unconstitutional under the substantive component of the Due Process Clause. We should note here that O'Connor concurred in the judgment only because she was ahead of her time. When a law exhibits such a desire to harm a politically unpopular group, O'Connor wrote, we have applied a more searching form of rational basis review to strike down such laws under the Equal Protection Clause. If she'd had her way, anti-gay discrimination would be prohibited in the way that discrimination on the basis of gender, race, religion, or nationality is. That was Kennedy's first chance to adopt the sturdier and more rationale that lesbian and gay people should be protected under the Equal Protection Clause. Of course, Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer could also have joined O'Connor's dissent, but Ginsburg, we know, is a fan of incrementalism. From finding that the liberty right protects sexual intimacy, the court would move on to extend the rights of same-sex couples on the same basis in Windsor, which struck down the Defense of Marriage Act's definition of marriage as opposite sex, and Obergefell, I hope I've got that name right, which legalized same-sex marriage. It should by now, but for some reason the name pronunciation escapes me. But it went no further. Now, like abortion rights, gay rights hang on the single hook of substantive due process. The conservative wing of the court couldn't be more pleased about that. Eliminating substantive due process would bring the conservatives several major social victories in one fell swoop. It's no wonder Justice Neil Gorsuch didn't even wait to get to the court before establishing his views on substantive due process. On the 10th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, his perch prior to the Supreme Court, Gorsuch made a point of criticizing substantive due process. In a case in which the plaintiff argued her substantive due process rights had been violated, Gorsuch refused to simply apply the doctrine. Instead, he noted that some believe if such a concept existed, it would be found elsewhere in the Constitution. Others, he offered, question whether substantive due process should find a home anywhere in the Constitution. Let's get that music rolling here so we can make our outro. This snark aside, while mild, is unusual. He only proceeds with the analysis after complaining that the Supreme Court clearly tells us that substantive due process exists. Gorsuch was even more directly skeptical of substantive due process insomuch as an ambitious and forward-looking lawyer could be in his Oxford dissertation, later a book, opposing a right to assisted suicide. And so you begin to see very quickly how broad the substantive due process right has been applied, and much to, we would guess, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dismay, not bolstered with more doctrine and other substantiations found elsewhere in the Constitution. But you begin to get the idea. There's very little left in the article. I recommend it to you. Time now, though, to hand over the microphone to Justice Putnam to bring you his West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I think you have gotten the gist here and have a pretty good basis from which to understand how much could change if 5 justices say so. Although, really, honestly, the broader point of everything you know could be overturned very easily if 5 people put their heads together and just say, I don't know what the reason is. I don't even have any reasoning. I don't know what I'm talking about. I just know I want this. That's as effective as a broadly reasoned and well-founded judicial opinion. It works just the same way.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Much to come, of course, about the many topics we didn't get to touch on today, and you should tune in absolutely, as you always should. Even if he was covering the same subject, you should be tuning in to what Justice Putnam has to say on it, because really, has ever enough been said about the craziness happening under this administration? I don't think so. Neither does Justice. Stay tuned.